Hi, my name's James O'Neill, doing this video from Cornwall, United Kingdom. It's Thursday. I'm going to call this video something like Lies, Statistics and More Lies. So, statistics are basically numbers. Numbers tell a story, and it's how you present those numbers. And if you do slight alterations, then you have altered the narrative of the story. And statistics are supposed to be a truthful story, but if you get somebody of the left, somebody of the right, you give them the same numbers, they will make a different story from those numbers, even though they're the same, because it's the narrative. You create a narrative. One of the best ones was on the eve of the Iraq war. Well, it wasn't a war, really. We attacked Iraq. And Alistair Campbell was in charge of the propaganda. That monster, that vile man, was in charge of the propaganda machine. And you had the march in London. People, this racist country, people came from all over this country. The estimates are 750,000 to 1 million people protested to stop the coming attack on Iraq. And I'm going to talk. It's really a nerve with me calling this country racist, but 750,000 to 1 million people attended that rally in London, and there was a mathematical formula in process, and it had been used for years, where an aerial photograph is taken, and the people are measured by the density per square 10 meters or whatever. So when you get a long march, little grids are put onto those people, and they can work out how many people there are by the number of grids that are occupied, and they have a density as well. So by the formula that had been in use for years, there were 750,000 people. But then Alistair Campbell, being the government propaganda, in charge of the propaganda, altered the formula, which then decreased the number of people in the march. But also there was evidence that photographs had been tampered with. What do you call it when you get a model and you make her slimmer and everything? Well, they took people out of the protest because they had the original photograph. I remember reading a newspaper or something where you had the original photograph and then you had the doctored photograph. So people were taken off the march by the doctoring of photographs and the altering of the mathematical formula. So this is where statistics are something that can be played with. And when you play with statistics and you alter them, you are basically telling a lie. So it's my belief that the government has been playing with numbers, the mathematical formulas. It's like when they first started to make us fearful, there were people dying and they were being reported as a COVID death, even if it was cancer. Because if they had been tested positive, they were just giving tests to people in hospital. People were being tested, and if a cancer patient was tested positive and they died of cancer, on the death certificate it was put as COVID because they had tested positive within the last 28 days, even though they died of cancer, and it was something that they suffered with. It was terminal cancer and they had been suffering for it for a while. So you can imagine that the medical profession and the people who want to control the narrative, the people who actually want the narrative that there is this awful pandemic, they were targeting, I should imagine they were targeting terminal people to test them. They were testing people in hospital, and then if they died, they were classed as a COVID death. And that's just a small example of what was happening. And a lot of deaths were actually deaths. But because he tested positive in the last 28 days, they were classed as COVID death. So that meant the graph, the COVID graph, deaths, was shooting up. Well, that's an Alistair Campbell tactic. That is a tactic right out of the Alistair Campbell book of dirty tricks. So statistics have to be looked at very carefully. So I'm going to give you a link to a story from the Daily Mail on Tuesday by, what's her name? Kate Pickles. And she's threw a couple of graphs in. So you can go and look at them. And basically they're making a prediction about how this vaccination will flatten the curve by October. Vaccinations will flatten it because this graph says so. This graph says that vaccines will flatten the curve, flatten the hump by October. And these graphs also say lots of other things. So I'm going to give you the link so you can just go look at them. You can go look at the page. Now, I'm going to send you to another graph. I'm going to send you to The Light. This is a free paper by UK Column. And I'm going to actually give you the link to issue 9, where they've got graphs. And these graphs tell a totally different story to the government narrative. These are government provided graphs. These are figures that have been provided by government departments. But they tell a different story than the translation, because it's as though these graphs have been translated into a foreign language and then translated back to English, and then there's been a mistranslation. So this graph here is the death rate for the last 20 years. And the deaths for 2020 were average. There hasn't been a spike of deaths, which can be explained by the formula. Anyone who died, who tested positive 28 days, well, the COVID graph is up there. But your deaths per year, per million people in this country, it's average for 20 years. There's nothing unusual. Well, isn't that what that Tory MP said in Parliament yesterday? The Tory MP said it and a couple of others said it, repeated it, but they never followed up on it. They just said there hasn't been the deaths that have been reported. You know, he said it's all, the hospitals have not had the deaths that they've said. You know, it's been misrepresented. And this is what he basically said. I forgot exactly what he said, but a Tory MP said it, a couple of others repeated it, but they never followed up on it. And there's an MP today in the paper who has said the narrative, the government narrative, is false. And that's what he said. So he's basically saying that they're lying. He's basically saying that Boris Johnson, the cock of hand, and the others, and the scientists, and the civil servants are all lying. And this Tory MP has said it. But I've got to ask the question, well, why doesn't he suspend himself from the Tory party and say, I'm going to class myself as separate from the Tories. You will not guarantee my vote. I'm going to decline the whip, take the whip off me, and I am going to become an independent Conservative until you start telling the truth. So why doesn't he do that? It's all right to just say, oh, you're not telling the truth. You've got to take action. So, but this graph, and I'm going to give you a connection to this page. You can go get the PDF document. You can go look at it. So this graph says, this is government provided statistics showing the total number of deaths per million people in this country. Now, if you look at this slightly more than, say, over the 5 years, it is slightly above. I mean, slight. But the average over 20 years, You think about the increase in population in the last 20 years. But it's anyway, the deaths are, that's wrong that, because it is per million people. So that's an interesting graph. And then we've got the global circulation of flu viruses. So we've talked about this, where flu has vanished. Flu has disappeared. Flu does not exist anymore. Flu is not killing anybody. It used to kill 30,000 people a year or something like that. It now doesn't kill anybody. So here is a graph of the flu deaths. Global, this is the globe, not just this country, global circulation of flu viruses. And you can see where it spikes at certain times of the year. In the winter, there are certain times of the year where the flu virus thrives. And that's when old people are affected at these times of year. So you've got all these spikes. 2020, nothing. Nobody's died of flu. Globally, nobody's died of flu in 2020. But the previous years, they are dying. And it's like those 2 years there where the conditions mustn't have been great for flu. So not as many have died as those years. But then we get to 2020, nobody's died of flu. What does it actually say? Yeah, flu numbers low last year. If that was, a heart monitor, where you get beep, beep, beep. Well, if that was a heart monitor for 2020 of flu deaths, you'd be dead because it's flatlined. Flu doesn't exist anymore. Nobody's dying of flu. This is your bed occupancy for hospitals. The orange and yellow lines show NHS bed occupancy for 2020-2021. They are clearly much lower than in previous 4 years. Bed occupancy for 2020-2021 is lower than the previous 4 years. Bed occupancy is lower. Now, somebody could argue that one way and somebody could argue that the other way. But at the end of the day, that's why the nurses were dancing in the corridors, because nobody was in the beds. The bed occupancy was lower than the previous 4 years. That's why your TikTok nurses found time to dance. There weren't as many people in the hospital. That's why they all fucking did the fucking birdie song. There weren't as many people. That is a government statistic. And then you've got this graph. On the globe, you have all different reasons why people die. And there are your reasons why people die in the globe, on this planet. There's a league table with the highest number at the top and the lowest numbers at the bottom. These are why people die on this planet. And COVID is below halfway. And it's in between yellow fever and dengue fever. There's actually a couple of others above it, but there's a couple of others below coronavirus, but I can't spell them, I can't pronounce them. But there's only a couple of numbers different. But basically, coronavirus, is in between yellow fever and dengue fever, or hepatitis A. It's not that great a killer on the global scale, yet we've been told it's a pandemic, like that Brad Pitt movie. The Brad Pitt movie, what was it called? Where like 30% of the globe died. And that's what they were telling us. They were telling us that 30% of the population could die. I'm sure they were. They were doing computer models. And they were saying that up to 25, 30% of the population could die. 10%, whatever. Even if it was 10% die of the population. Yet here we see 2020 was basically average for the last 20 years. Average. Bed occupancy in the hospitals was lower than the previous 4 years. Yet we were told 30–40%. Now, I'm going to give you the link to this. Now, this is connected to UK Column, The Light, and it's a free paper, but you can make a donation. So if you can, maybe make a donation. And you can get the PDF, you can just read it or download it. And it's free. But look at that. So look at the Daily Mail with hers. Now, the interesting thing, you see this on the newspaper, it's different than, slightly different than the internet Daily Mail. And I'm going to tell you what, this graph here on the internet, underneath the graph, there's some writing which is not here. And on the internet, Kate Pickles has put 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine reduces the chance of hospitalisation by 90%. So that's what she's written on the internet underneath this graph. 2 doses of the vaccination, the jab, of Pfizer's jab, reduces the chances of hospitalisation by 90%. Yet what did Matt Hancock say yesterday in Parliament? And I highlighted it in my video. Matt Hancock, the cock of Han, in Parliament said there's been a spike in hospitalisations. That's why we've got to lengthen the lockdown, the restrictions. We've got to add a month because there's been a spike. There's been a massive increase in hospitalisations. And Matt Hancock actually said in Parliament yesterday that 20% of admissions to hospital are people who have had 2 jabs. And 20% are people who have had 1 jab. Yet Kate Pickles, on the internet version of this, is saying that 2 doses of Pfizer vaccine reduces the chance of hospitalisation by 90%. And we're being told that we have to carry on the restrictions for another month to encourage people to get the vaccine to save people's lives. Yet Matt Hancock is saying that even with 2 doses of vaccine, 20% of the hospital, people going into hospital, this spike, have had 2 jabs and 20% have had 1. So that's 40% really. So you see, there's lies with statistics. Your Daily Mail, Matt Hancock, they're using maths and graphs to tell lies. Now, is Kate Pickles lying when she says 90%? Is Matt Hancock lying when he says that 20% of people who've had 2 jabs go into? And none of the MPs seem to pick up on this. Now, when you get people who deliberately lie, like Alistair Campbell, the beast of Iraq, then that's mind control. And that is taking people in a direction that by control of their mind, their opinion, their thoughts. And what we've seen in 2020 is nobody's allowed to say anything different or think anything different. So we've now got this situation of total mind control. We've now got this situation in this country and on this planet, or in certain places on this planet, where it's as though we are not allowed to deviate from what they're telling us. Well, that's mind control. So I'm going to give you a link to a video, and it's got a German title, so you wouldn't find it. You wouldn't know it was there. But it's all in English. What it is it's a guy who's connected to UK Column, Brian Gerrish. And Brian Gerrish has studied the art of mind control, how this government, this country, the mind control is extreme. And he's studied it for years. And he's become so knowledgeable on mind control. And remember, Alistair Campbell, how he got us into Iraq was by mind control. You know, we're only 40 seconds from a weapon of mass destruction hitting us. And people actually believed that. And he drew a graph. He drew a map of Iraq and he drew the circles, boom, where these weapons could reach. And the nearest he got to us was Cyprus. But because it was a military base, it was classed as an attack on this country. A graph was used. Alistair Campbell got somebody to copy and paste a graph with circles going outwards. And one of the circles connected to the base in Iraq, the RAF base. And that was considered an attack on... Now, that was mind control. Because people believed that Saddam Hussein could attack this country with a missile. With a possible germ warfare in the head of the missile. People actually believed that because they never read what was written. They never really read it. They only saw the graph and the headline. Now, Brian Gerrish has studied mind control. And he has become such an expert, some German scientist invited him to come to Germany and explain it to them. And these German scientists were really, really impressed. When I say impressed, at his knowledge. Because he's far ahead of many people on this subject. So I'm going to give you a link to the video. And what Brian is talking about is the mind control of this country. And it's up to you to decide why they're doing it. What is at the heart of it? Is it a political dogma? Or is it a spiritual energy? Is it politics? Is it just a political point of view that they are determined to take us either to the right or to the left? Or is it something more disturbing? So I'm going to give you the link to the documentary. This, you can just go and have a glance at it. You don't need to study it, but go and have a look at it. But the light, please go and look at it. Download it maybe. But it's there. Go look at these 4 government graphs. And they do not, even though these are government figures, they do not relate to what we heard in Parliament yesterday from the Cock of Hand and Boris Johnson and others who want to convince us that we need this extension, and also we need more than that. We all need to be vaccinated. And they're making it so that people believe that you're basically criminally insane if you don't take the vaccine. You're reckless. You're criminally reckless. You're criminally bordering insane if you don't take the vaccine. Now, that's mind control. And that's what Brian Gerrish is talking about. So you've got those links. So mind control. Who uses mind control? Well, we've got the left and we've got the right. Extreme right, extreme left. And we've got examples of it in history. That's why these Germans wanted this interview with Brian. Now, Rob has written a book. Rob, who does videos here. I give him my camera and he does his videos. And Rob has written a book. And he's got so much information in this book. And I'm going to give you the Amazon link. And it's called Medical Fascism. You are not allowed to argue with the doctors. Now, I went to my doctor's yesterday. I had to go see him about something. He phoned me up. He said, I can fit you in. Because I wrote him a letter saying, I know you're busy. Can you squeeze me in? So I got a phone call. I said, yeah, come in, 4:15. So I went in. And I'm like, oh, he'll be asking me about the vaccine. Because I'd had a text the day before. And I've just ignored everything that comes to me from my doctors. I ignore. So I waited for my appointment. And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to try and tell me. And I thought, I'll deal with it in a light-hearted way. I'll say this, I'll say that. But I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to get involved. My doctor never even asked me about the vaccine. He's looking at my records to see my medicines because he's doing me a prescription. He never even asked me if I'm having the vaccine, my doctor. And I thought that was telling. My doctor never mentioned a word about me not having the vaccination, and I'm 65 years old. Never told me it'd be good for me or anything. But medical fascism, the doctors are telling us, and that's why Rob's called it medical fascism. So I'm going to read something that Rob's put in the book. Got a little personal note. James, keep shining the light of truth in this dark world in your own blunt way. Who would have thought it, Winningshaw against the evil elite? Because me and Rob are both from Winningshaw. And how we met it's a long story. We met this group, and I shouldn't have been there. I got there, and as soon as I was there, I knew I shouldn't have been there. But that's how I met Rob. So I had to be there at this group that I knew I shouldn't be with, these people. I just had nothing in common with them. But Rob was there. You see? So I was meant to meet Rob, and here we are now. And I'm going to tell you something what he's put. This book is dedicated to historians and their pursuit of truth, justice and freedom, who have kept alive the knowledge of the true nature of human beings and suffered ridicule, injustice and even death to set a foundation and an example as mankind enters the end times. Because we are in a battle. You can see it coming. We're in a battle. But with mind control, how do you control people? Well, you ridicule them. Who have kept alive the knowledge of the true nature of human beings and suffered ridicule and injustice. What's his name's in hospital now, isn't he? The Aussie. You don't hear about him anymore. You set up WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. That is an injustice. That is a gross injustice. Julian Assange in hospital because he tried to tell the truth. Ridicule, injustice, and even death. Dr. David Kelly. Dr. David Kelly said there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he was, in my humble opinion, he was murdered. And the whole of government came together to create a situation where there was no coroner's report into Dr. David Kelly's death. Dr. David Kelly is only the second person in history, I'm sure of that figure, I'm sure of it, to have never had a coroner's inquest into how he died. Now that's mind control. Now that's a bit more than left wing or right wing. That's evil. And at the heart of that was Alistair Campbell, the beast, and Tony Blair, the beast. That's what we're up against. And that's why this is called medical fascism. That's why Rob's called it medical fascism. Because we're not being allowed opinions. They're the government figures, and they tell a different story to what, even though they are government figures, they're not being represented. The government are misrepresenting this. They're not producing this in their argument in Parliament. Because if they produce these figures in Parliament, they wouldn't be able to justify continuing the restrictions and also forcing the vaccine on us. Because the average deaths, the deaths for the last 20 years, 2020 was average. Occupancy in beds in the hospitals was the lowest, lower than the previous 4 years. There was a significant drop. These are government figures. So I'm going to give you the link to this, to the Daily Mail. Just go and have a look at how they presented the graph, and then go look at the light and choose who you choose, whether you go for the propaganda, the mind control. Now this could be mind control, this could be propaganda, this could be lies, but it tells a different story to that. So you, as a free thinking person, are allowed to choose. but not according to the medical profession. The medical profession are not letting you choose. So I'm going to give you a link to Rob's book, where you can get it on Kindle, or you can actually get the book. What I'm doing is, me and Rob are going to have a talk about this in a couple of weeks' time. And I'll also give you a link. Go watch it on Mind Control. Now, if the Germans have invited Brian over because they are impressed with his knowledge, then that is a statement.